Welcome to today's video, where we're taking a deep and heartfelt dive into the extraordinary life, legacy, and final days of Jimmy Swaggart, a man whose voice resonated across generations, whose music stirred the soul, and whose story is a tapestry of faith, triumph, and human frailty. Jimmy Swaggart passed away on July 1, 2025, at the age of 90, leaving behind a legacy that's as profound as it is polarizing. Today, we'll explore the details of his cause of death, his age, his family, his net worth, his lifestyle, and the biography of a televangelist who soared to the heights of global influence and faced some of the most public and painful falls. This isn't just a story about a preacher, it's a story about a man, a family, and a faith that endured through decades of joy and struggle. So, settle in, and let's walk through the life of Jimmy Lee Swaggart together. Jimmy Swaggart was born on March 15, 1935, in the small, dusty town of Faraday, Louisiana, a place where life was shaped by the land, the church, and the struggle to make ends meet. His parents, Willie Leon, known to most as Son or Son, and Minnie Belle Swaggart, were sharecroppers who worked the fields under the relentless Louisiana sun. They were people of deep faith, rooted in the Pentecostal traditions of the Assemblies of God, where music and worship were as vital as air. Faraday was a town of modest means, where dreams often took a backseat to survival, but for young Jimmy, the church was a refuge, a place where he found purpose. At just 8 years old, he stood in a revival meeting, his small frame trembling as he spoke in tongues and delivered prophecies that left the congregation stunned. It was as if God had reached down and marked this boy for something extraordinary, or so the people of Faraday believed. That moment, filled with spiritual fervor, set the course for his life. The Swaggart family was more than just close, they were inseparable, bound by blood, music, and a shared sense of destiny. Jimmy grew up alongside his cousins, Jerry Lee Lewis and Mickey Gilley, two boys who would become legends in their own right, Jerry Lee in rock and roll and Mickey in country music. The Swaggart, Lewis, and Gilley families were like threads in a tightly woven fabric, each one distinct yet part of the same cloth. Jimmy once described them as a big, tight ball of rubber bands, a vivid image of their interconnected lives. As kids, Jimmy and Jerry Lee would sneak off to rhythm clubs, soaking in the raw, pulsing sounds of the South, blues, jazz, and early rock. Those nights shaped Jimmy's love for music, but while his cousins chased fame and secular worlds, Jimmy felt a different pull. He was drawn to the gospel, to the fire of preaching, to the call of spreading God's word. But that call didn't come without struggle. As a teenager, Jimmy grappled with his faith, resisting the idea of salvation until a transformative moment at 8, when he felt God's presence wash over him like a wave. From that day forward, his path was clear, though it would be anything but easy. At 17, Jimmy married Frances Anderson, a 15-year-old girl he met while playing music at her father's church in Wisner, Louisiana. Their love was young, passionate, and grounded in a shared devotion to faith. But their early years were far from glamorous. With their newborn son, Donnie, in tow, Jimmy and Frances lived a nomadic life, preaching in small churches across rural Louisiana. They stayed in church basements, cramped motels, and borrowed rooms, scraping by on $30 a week. Imagine the scene, a young couple, barely out of their teens, traveling backroads with a baby, their only certainty the belief that God had a plan. It was a life of sacrifice, of lean days and long nights, but it forged a bond that would withstand decades of challenges. Frances became more than Jimmy's wife. She was his partner in every sense, later taking on the role of chief financial officer for their ministry. Donnie, their only child, grew up steeped in the same faith, eventually becoming a preacher and a pillar of the family's mission. Together, they built something enduring, a legacy that would outlast the storms to come. Jimmy's ministry began to take shape in the 1960s, rooted in the raw energy of his early days as a street preacher. He'd stand on flatbed trailers, his voice ringing out over fields and small-town squares, preaching with a passion that drew crowds. In 1960, he recorded his first gospel album, Some Golden Daybreak, a collection of songs meant for revival attendees but which found a broader audience when radio stations picked it up. Listeners were captivated by Jimmy's voice, soulful, raw, and unmistakably sincere, and his skillful piano playing, which carried the spirit of his Faraday roots. The response was overwhelming, and it marked the beginning of something bigger. Jimmy turned down an offer from Sun Records, the label that launched Jerry Lee Lewis, choosing instead to follow his spiritual calling. By 1971, he had launched the Camp Meeting Hour, a radio show that quickly grew into a television ministry. By the 1980s, Jimmy Swaggart was a household name, his telecasts reaching over 3,000 stations in millions of homes across the United States and beyond. His crusades filled arenas in places as far-flung as Argentina, Russia, South Africa, and Brazil, where tens of thousands gathered to hear him preach and sing. At its peak, Jimmy Swaggart Ministries was a powerhouse, generating $150 million a year, with a sprawling campus in Baton Rouge that included a Bible college, a printing press, and a 24/7 television network employing over 1,200 people. But with great heights come great risks, and Jimmy's world was about to unravel. In 1988, a rival preacher named Marvin Gorman exposed a scandal that would shake the evangelical world to its core. Jimmy had been involved with a prostitute in New Orleans, and photos surfaced of him entering a motel with a woman named Deborah Murphy. The revelation was a bombshell, shattering the image of the man millions saw as a beacon of faith. The Assemblies of God, the denomination that had ordained him, suspended him and demanded a year-long disciplinary hiatus. When Jimmy refused, they defrocked him, stripping him of his credentials. On February 21, 1988, he stood before his congregation at Family Worship Center in Baton Rouge, his face wet with tears, and delivered a confession that would become one of the most iconic moments in televangelism history. "I have sinned," he said, his voice breaking under the weight of his words. "I take the responsibility. I take the blame." It was a raw, gut-wrenching moment, broadcast to millions, that left viewers torn between heartbreak and betrayal. The fallout was swift and brutal, his ministry lost viewers, donors pulled back, and the empire he'd built seemed on the verge of collapse. The 1990s brought another scandal, another encounter with a prostitute, further tarnishing Jimmy's reputation. The details were less public but no less damaging, reinforcing the narrative of a man who couldn't escape his flaws. Yet, through it all, Frances stood by him, her loyalty unwavering. Their marriage, tested by public humiliation, held firm, a testament to their shared commitment. Donnie, too, became a rock for his father, taking on a larger role in the ministry as Jimmy worked to rebuild. The road back was slow and painful, but Jimmy was relentless. In 2009, he launched the SonLife Broadcasting Network, a commercial-free platform that carried his message to a new generation. His daily Bible study program, The Message of the Cross, became a cornerstone of the network, while Frances hosted Frances and Friends, a talk show that tackled faith and life with her characteristic warmth. Donnie preached alongside his father, and Jimmy's grandson, Gabriel, led Crossfire, the ministry's youth outreach. The Swaggart family remained a unit, their faith a lighthouse in the storm. Jimmy's lifestyle reflected both his humble beginnings and the wealth his ministry brought. In the early days, he and Frances lived simply, moving from one small town to another, their possessions fitting in the back of a car. But by the 1980s, their success allowed for a different kind of life. They built a 9,337 square foot mansion in Baton Rouge, a sprawling estate set on 20 acres of manicured grounds. The home, with its 4-column jacuzzi and gold swan faucet, was a symbol of their rise, but also a lightning rod for critics who saw it as extravagant for a man preaching humility. The estate included homes for Donnie and his family, creating a family compound that spoke to their closeness. Jimmy's net worth, estimated at $10 to $15 million by 2025, was built on the ministry's revenue, his music, and his writing. He authored over 50 Christian books, including the Expositor's Study Bible, a work that became a staple for many believers. His gospel records, which sold 15 million copies worldwide, earned him a Grammy nomination and cemented his place as one of the genre's giants. Despite the controversies, his financial success was a reflection of his enduring impact. Jimmy's life wasn't just about preaching, it was about music, too. His piano playing was a gift, a blend of gospel, blues, and the southern sounds of his youth. He recorded dozens of albums, from Some Golden Daybreak to Healing, each one carrying the raw emotion that defined him. His concerts were events, drawing thousands who came not just to hear him preach but to feel his music. He once said, "Music is the language of the heart," and for Jimmy, it was a bridge between his faith and his audience. His songs, like There Is a River and Let Me Thank You Again, became anthems for a generation of believers, their lyrics offering hope and redemption. Even in his later years, when his voice grew softer and his hands less steady, he never stopped playing, never stopped singing. As Jimmy entered his later years, he remained active in his ministry, preaching and teaching with the same fire that had defined him as a young man. But time takes its toll, and on June 15, 2025, Jimmy suffered a cardiac arrest that left him in critical condition. The news spread quickly, and Donnie took to the airwaves, his voice heavy with emotion as he shared the update with their congregation. "Without a miracle, his time will be short," he said, asking for prayers while holding on to hope. Frances, ever the steadfast partner, stayed by Jimmy's side, leaving the hospital only briefly to shower and eat. The family leaned on their faith, trusting in God's plan, but the reality was stark. On July 1, 2025, Jimmy Swaggart passed away at the age of 90. The official cause of death was cardiac arrest, a sudden and final end to a life that had touched so many. The news reverberated across the world, with countless posts mourning the loss of a man whose ministry, though marred by scandal, had shaped the landscape of modern televangelism. Jimmy's death was a moment of reflection for millions. To some, he was a flawed but sincere servant of God, a man whose preaching brought them closer to faith, whose music lifted their spirits. To others, he was a symbol of televangelism's excesses, his scandals casting a long shadow over his contributions. The truth, as it often is, lies in the space between. Jimmy Swaggart was a man of contradictions, passionate, gifted, and deeply human. His crusades filled stadiums, his music reached hearts, and his ministry built schools, fed the hungry, and spread the gospel to corners of the world most preachers never reached. But his mistakes were public, painful, and unforgettable, etched into the narrative of his life. He once said, "Time is not kind to those who have failed in a public forum," and there's truth in that. Yet, for those who loved him, his legacy is defined not by his falls, but by his resilience, his faith, and the family he left behind: Frances, Donnie, Gabriel, and a sprawling clan of grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carry his mission forward. Jimmy's story is a reminder of the complexity of human life. He was a boy from Faraday who dreamed big, a preacher who moved mountains, a musician who sang from the soul, and a man who faced his failures in the harsh light of the public eye. His ministry, at its height, was a beacon of hope for millions, offering salvation in a world that often felt broken. His scandals, though devastating, were part of a larger story of redemption, a story he preached about until his final days. As we reflect on his life, it's hard not to feel the weight of it all: the joy, the pain, the faith, the flaws. Jimmy Swaggart wasn't perfect, but he was relentless, a man who never stopped believing in the message he carried, even when the world doubted him. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the life of Jimmy Swaggart. It's a story that challenges us to think about faith, forgiveness, and the power of second chances. If this moved you, if it made you reflect on the highs and lows of a life lived in the spotlight, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories like this. Share your thoughts in the comments. What did Jimmy Swaggart's life and ministry mean to you? Until next time, take care, and keep seeking the stories that shape our world.